Hello, and welcome to the Cultivating Confidence podcast. I am your host, Dr. Nicole Grams. I am a life coach who specializes in anxiety, health, and human design. And I also happen to be a functional medicine pharmacist. This podcast is a compilation of conversations that I've had with clients and colleagues. So listen in as we explore the mind, body, and soul's confidence in its many forms. All right, so we are talking about happiness tonight and allowing yourself to be happy. And like most days, almost all of them, I'm going to start with a short grounding meditation type deal. So wherever you are, get comfy, ground in, take a deep breath, close your eyes if it feels comfortable for you. Unless you are driving, please don't close your eyes if you're driving. All right, take a deep breath. Ground into your body. And just come to your center. And since we're talking about happiness tonight, I want you to, on a scale from 1 to 10, where devastation is 1 and 10 is sheer joy and bliss, where are you right now? Look at it like a ruler in your head with a marker somewhere along the line, where you're feeling in regards to the joy in your life, the happiness in your life. Just breathe in and just be honest with yourself with where you are right now. Bring your awareness more into your body. And imagine that scale in your head as you breathe. Imagine the scale shifting up just a tick, just a little bit. Breathe in, connect more, breathe out. Releasing anything in the way of your happiness, releasing tightness and fear and tension. Do it again, breathing in and out. Let go of fear, anxiety, anything in your way. Now visualize this happiness ruler and allow that marker on the scale to move up all by itself. Breathe into that marker, into where you are. Let it settle. Does it move up again? And can you stay there with your breath? Relax into it further. Allow that into your body. Take one more breath. Let it go. When you're ready, blink your eyes back open and come back. I would invite you to picture this ruler of happiness, this scale of happiness as frequently as you want. And just imagine yourself, like literally just imagining yourself pushing that ruler marker up can help you stay calm and grounded. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Right. So let's start with the belief that most of us have, at least most of us here probably have, that everyone deserves happiness, right? And by that logic, well, like everyone, every person on the earth, right, deserves happiness. And you are a person on this earth. So therefore, you are included in this everyone, although our Venn diagrams are sometimes like everybody else and then me, right? So we know we at some level deserve happiness. And generally speaking, you know what happiness feels like. You felt it before, but do you know how to allow yourself to experience it? And to genuinely let it enter your life, let it consume you without letting your unworthiness seep through the cracks. So we know how to feel happiness. We have felt it in our lives, right? But a lot of the times, what we kind of think of as happiness is pretty topical. And when I was preparing for this conversation, there were a lot of things that came up in my mind that I wanted to dive into as usual. So I wanted to talk about what happiness was and all the things that can stop you from feeling it, all the ways you self-sabotage, and all the things that happen. But the more I wrote, the more I realized I was writing about the wrong thing. So I scrapped everything I had written because my experience with happiness in my life has changed dramatically in the past few years. And I no longer believe that it is a goal in my life to be happy all the time. It's not my goal. Happy some of the times, yes, absolutely. But I also want to feel sad and mad and frustrated and loving and powerful and proud. And happiness, sure, makes the list. But if I focus on happiness all the time, it crowds the rest of them out. And it is my goal to feel all of the emotions that I encounter along my path. And I do still resist a lot of them, right? Happiness doesn't happen to be one of them, at least most of the time. But happiness as a goal is completely unachievable. We don't want to be happy when we have been wronged. We don't want to be happy when someone passes away or you get broken up with. Like, well, maybe you might want to be happy sometimes if someone breaks up with you, but but it's not a reasonable expectation to think that happiness should be like the main center point of our life. Like it's exhausting, first of all, to be happy all the time. And it's not, I mean, it's just not possible, right? And I do want to point out that if your brain is conditioned to believe certain things about emotions or circumstances or anything like that, it will probably drag you down. And it is possible to drag this 50-50 positive to negative ratio in your life and skew it more towards negative, right? Because when we resist the negative, it becomes more negative, right? And we've talked about that in past sessions, but yeah, just briefly, like some of you have been conditioned to believe that you don't deserve happiness, that you have, haven't worked hard enough, that you haven't earned it. Some of you believe that happiness is unsafe, that the moment something good happens, the moment you start to feel good, something bad will come and either knock you on your ass or something will be thrown in your face. And it's just not safe to feel happy, let alone show it externally, right? Because something bad always happens when I feel good, right? And that, just notice that belief in and of itself will manifest more of that into your life. And just notice that, like, we're not judging ourselves for it. It's not our fault. But where we learned this is different for each of us. And it's often through trauma or past relationship trauma or friendship trauma gone awry, or from what parents said when we were little or adults, even in the media, movies, all these things, wherever it is, whatever you were exposed to that got the message through to you that you don't deserve this, you're not worthy of happiness, right? Maybe you had someone use happiness against you, telling you that you are being boastful or you're conceited. Like, how could you ever be happy when there's some tragedy in the world that's happening, right? How could you be happy when you haven't finished your chores, right? You're not alone. You're not alone. You're not allowed to be happy because you're a bad person, or you're showing off, or you're just flaunting yourself around, right? You're so stuck up. And so many people are stuck in their own unhappiness and they can't fathom how someone else might be able to be happy. So they unconsciously will try to make it their goal to tear people down to their level, right? When you look at someone and if you are in a state of internal struggle, and you look at someone who is genuinely confident with themselves, feeling good about themselves, you look at it and you see arrogance. And it's easy to point fingers and say, hey, you're doing it wrong. Like, this is too much. You're too much, right? And we've all heard that, well, if I'm too much, go find less sort of thing, which I think is awesome. But also just notice, like, there have been times in my life where I have been that person, pulling people down because, oh, you're too something, whatever. Instead of just letting them enjoy their happiness, I pulled them down, right? And A lot of us do it unconsciously. A lot of us do it because there's jealousy involved or envy involved. Like, oh, my life isn't this great, whatever. Theirs shouldn't be either, right? But just notice that, especially when people do this over and over and over again and are unwilling to look at their own patterns, we call these energy vampires. And they can be anyone, anywhere. And you have probably met many of them in your life. They don't take accountability for their actions or their own emotions. They blame you for how they feel. They are constantly pulling people into drama. They are always trying to one-up you, whether that's a positive or negative. So they might listen to your story, something bad that you've been through recently, and then they'll tell you a story about how theirs is far worse, right? Like, oh, my trauma is worse than yours because of this. It might not always come off that way, but like it can sound very nice, right? Or in the positive spin, you might be, going to get a certification or a degree or something, and then they'll remind you that, oh, they got a better degree than you. Maybe it was from a better school. Maybe it was a master's degree instead of a bachelor's degree, or some dumb shit like that. Right? Energy vampires. And if you can think of people that fit that description that I just gave, I want to encourage you to set good boundaries for yourself and limit your exposure to them as much as you can, especially if you are on this healing journey, like I think we all are. And it can be really hard to break free from that, but I promise you it's worth it and you are worth it. Now, let's say you have miraculously cut all of the energy vampires that you know of out of your life, but you're still struggling with allowing yourself to feel happiness. You have these fleeting moments of joy that kind of spiral into suspicion or anxiety or to-do lists or what ifs, right? And this is like the epitome of conditioning that we experience. Think about this. Like when we look at infants, brand new babies, we don't see any blame or shame or criticism of them, even if they're crying, right? You see them as worthy of all the things. They are worthy of success, of love, of happiness, 100%, every single one. But somewhere along the way, people start telling us things. And as kids, we don't know what the hell to do with this information because we haven't developed the emotional maturity to be able to process anything on our own, right? And especially if we grow up in middle or upper class, well, America, because that's my reference, but I'm sure this is true elsewhere as well. But we have enough food to eat. We have a place to live. There's no outward reason to point to why we shouldn't be successful or loved or happy, right? So when it's our outward circumstances that look good on paper, when we hear things about ourselves in regards to love and happiness, things like, you're a bad kid. What are you doing here being lazy? You have stuff to do. You make me so mad. Like not the adult taking responsibility for their own emotions, but it's because of you, right? My life was great until you came around. You did such a good job on that, but you didn't do this other thing, right? We can't point to anything around us to explain why this feeling is inside of us. So we turn it inward. And as kids, we don't think, oh, mom, mom or dad just doesn't know how to manage their emotions. This has nothing to do with me. Like that's not what kids do. They don't sit there and think, oh, they must be really hurting to say this to their child. I feel so bad for them, right? No, it goes immediately into there is something wrong with me. We don't jump to compassion for other kids or other people. We don't have the capability to do that until we're adults, right? Or, well, we start to learn it along the way, but certainly not as kids. We jump to people pleasing so our lives get better, and we learn how to make sure that the circumstances are exactly right so the adults feel specific ways. And then we learn to criticize ourselves in the same way that we heard it from others because it must be true, right? This is what they're saying. This must be the truth of the world. And what happens is it gets ingrained in us for our entire lives until we're willing to do the work and look at it. And it's really uncomfortable. But just look at some point, we go from this innocent child, innocent baby, deserving of all the things, to hearing things about us that make us believe that we're the problem and that we don't deserve love or happiness or even safety until these conditions are met. This is conditional love, conditional happiness. And we want to make sure that the people around us are happy, and then we can feel happy. But then we got to keep an eye out for what could go wrong to prevent that from going wrong and to make everybody else happy, right? The longer we spend believing that and staying in that cycle, the harder it is to break those patterns, because that's all they are, is thought patterns. It's literally sentences in your brain that you have thought over and over and over and over and over again, and they are hardwired in your brain. And the second you start trying to change the wiring, brain has its own opinion. Brain wants to conserve energy, avoid pain, and seek pleasure. And none of those things are good for changing what your default brain is. Brain wants to think the same thoughts it always has because it is familiar and it is easy. And this also reminds me of a book called The Big Leap. It's a really good book if you haven't read it, would highly recommend. But in that book, the author talks about the upper limit problem. And the upper limit problem is like having a thermostat set point for our happiness, sort of like the ruler that we talked about before. But when we are set at a certain limit and we exceed the upper limit of our happiness meter, something in our brain kicks in to regulate it and bring it back down to a safe level. This is where we know this is, things won't go wrong if we stay here, but you just went here. This is not safe, right? So our thermostat, when we go up, what it looks like when brain wants to autocorrect, it looks like, we just got a big promotion that we're super happy about. And we start to feel good about ourselves, but then we notice somehow we ended up in a big fight with our significant other. Or we're looking at the promotion that we have, and then we have this huge imposter syndrome of, I can't possibly be qualified for this position that I've always wanted my whole life, right? And we start to have a mental breakdown about why we're not qualified and come up with all the brain comes up with all the reasons to bring our happiness meter back down, right? And that thermostat, that happiness thermostat, is set in our childhood. And if we grew up feeling loved and worthy, that set point is much higher than if you grew up feeling misunderstood and criticized and bullied. And as adults now, we can bring awareness to that set point that we're at now. And we can work to increase the temperature, but it takes going against that motivational triad of conserving energy, avoiding pain, and seeking pleasure. We have to put effort into new beliefs. And I've talked about the expressway that our brain takes to, I call it a different city every time, but to like Doomsville, right? We've created this neural pathway that is fast, it is easy, we don't have to use energy on it, to doom and gloom. But what we want to go is to the beach where we can have fruity little drinks and sun, and it's just relaxing and fun. And in order to do that, we have to stop and take a left turn or a right turn, or just get off of the path. And what's ahead of us if we do that is a jungle, and we need to get our machete out. It is hard physical labor to literally whack down the stuff in our way and start building a road in that direction to the beach, right? Brain doesn't want to put forth that effort, and it will try its best to keep you safe in what you already know and the belief that you already have set up about the world, right? And what I would suggest if you are in this situation is first bringing awareness to that it's the thoughts in your head and beliefs in your head, because you have repeated the same thoughts for decades at this point, right? You have to recognize that they're thoughts that have been planted in your head, and they are not you. They are not from you. This is not your fault. And I often take my clients through this process of creating a character in their head of all the shitty things that are said. And what kind of character if you're interested in Harry Potter, it's like the boggarts in the closet, right? When you open them up and they see you, they become your worst fear, but you can make them look ridiculous, right? What I recommend is having some sort of character that you can see is shouting all these insults at you. But then you can look at it and see like, oh, this, for some people, it might look like a drunk guy on the corner. Like, oh, sorry, guy. Like, I'm just not interested in listening to what you have to say. Sometimes you make some really good points, but it's really not what I want to listen to, right? All day long. Like, you're exhausting. Please go home, right? If that's the guy that's in your head saying these, shouting these terrible things at you, are you likely to listen to them all the time? Probably not, right? And it's not your fault that he's shouting these things at you. He is a metaphor for things that have been implanted in your brain from childhood on, right? These are traumas that we've had that, and they're not necessarily traumas in the big T trauma kind, but trauma is your interpretation of a situation, right? And a lot of times we turn that in on ourselves. But when you can really feel into like, this is not me thinking this thought, and you allow all the emotions to come up anyway, like, oh, drunk dude really got me feeling some feels. I'm going to feel them first. And then without judgment, observing them. And only then, only once you have felt the feels, you can start to examine what thoughts you want to change. And it is a game of repetition. You have to look backwards first and do an autopsy of the situation that you have been through. You have to identify what the red flag thoughts were, and it takes work to do that, right? But then as you get better at looking back and seeing what went wrong in the past, you get better at noticing it in the moment. And then if you're anything like me, you get super frustrated and super critical with yourself because you're at the point where you see it happening. You see the red flags and then you can't make it stop, right? It just is, it's going down the freeway. You cannot stop it, but you at least see the terrible trucks driving by, right? You can see the red flags. And then the more you notice it in the moment, the more power you have over it, because the more you start to realize in the moment, this is a choice that I can make. And then you start to slowly make that choice. And then you get super pissed at yourself again because it is hard work and it takes energy and you have to do it 1,000 times. It takes effort and it takes biting your tongue and it takes an incredible amount of discomfort and compassion for yourself. And we're not used to feeling that for ourselves, right? Compassion. Like, of course, this is hard work. Of course, you're not going to be perfect. But when expectations from society are set up to where you're not allowed to fail, right? Obviously, you're going to feel absolutely shitty for a while. But think about how many times one of those shitty thoughts has hijacked your brain. The subconscious thought of like, I can't be happy if I haven't done the dishes, or I can't be happy because that's when my significant other gets crazy, or my boss thinks I'm not doing my job if I'm laughing too much, right? You have to learn to give equal airtime to that new thought that replaces it. And you might have to nudge your brain 1,001 times before it starts to stick. And it gets old and you start to criticize yourself. And I know that I for sure do, right? Yeah. So practice feeling what you want to feel on purpose. And that's what we did at the beginning. And that's where we moved our happiness up on the scale. But you are capable of feeling whatever you want, whenever you want, and you are worthy of doing so. But yeah, just how many times are you willing to rethink a thought and readjust your thinking? Like if you knew it would take 1,000 times and you're only on try number 57, would you be willing to keep going if you knew at the end you'd be able to stop? Thank you for taking the time to listen in today. Many of you will be able to take the ideas that you've heard and apply them in your daily life, and that's really all you need. That's amazing. But for those of you who could use a little one-on-one help with how to make these things actually work for you in your real life, please reach out. The link to schedule a consult with me is in the show notes. You don't have to do this alone. See you soon.